Welcome to Andy Audio Vault. For today's episode, I'll be doing a review on this new IEM from Simgot, which is EA500. So let's just check out the content first. Price at $79 US. This is what we get from Simgot for the EA500. The box itself. And these are the things that's included inside the box. Of course, the IEMs, the cable assembly, which is 3.5 mm single-ended. Tips here. These are the set of tips that was included in my set, which is both all silicone tips. And these things here, which are O-rings, rubber O-ring for these two different type of nozzles. Okay, let me just quickly show you the nozzle itself because I'll be talking about it more later. As you can see here, this is the black type nozzle. And this is the red nozzle. If you check the difference between these two nozzles, perhaps you can see here, the red one obviously has thicker and denser filter attached to it. So swapping between those two, in fact, will change the sound in a way that it will alter the sound frequency as well. And let's have a look at the IEM itself. One thing that I must say, it is beautifully made, metal construction. And see here, there are few cavities can be seen. This looks to me like a breathing hole. And another one here. And of course, this is how we attach the nozzle. The red one here being the stock one. So I'll just put it this way. And also here. Then attach the tips. Let's talk about the sound profile of this EA500. As you can see here at the back of the box and on screen right now, EA500 comes in two tuning profile. It is marked by red, which is actually the red nozzle itself on the IEM, and the blue graph there represented by the black nozzle. So if you look at it, there are subtle differences, but in general, I would consider that EA500 is tuned towards being closer to neutral target. And I say close to being neutral because I can still see there's a bit of boosting in the lower frequency. Otherwise, for the rest of the frequency seems neutral enough to me. And in fact, the subtle differences between the red and the black nozzle is that you would notice that the blue ones, which is the black nozzle, exhibit a bit more of energy with the upper frequency. And of course, with my own ears also, I am hearing that the different also impart some sort of flatness of presentation to the lower frequency. However, just put it this way, after using this for like almost 200 hours now, I can safely say that I prefer the red nozzle more than the black one for the fact that it sounds smoother and a bit more well balanced towards, the sort of sound that I like. So that's pretty much on the sound spectrum itself. Okay, now let's talk about the sound analysis for this EA500. In order to give you a bit of perspective, I have identified 10 different characteristics, as you can see on screen right now, at which individually they will be graded, and the total number will then help me decide on the final verdict of this unit. Okay, and before I do that, let's just clarify that my rating have a basis, or should I say foundation, based on performance to price ratio. So this is essentially a rating which I have designated for anything up to 100 US dollar. Okay, now let's just proceed to number one itself, which is dynamic presentation. So when I say about dynamic presentation, this is to describe how fluid and how well the presentation of the sound spectrum itself, anywhere from the lower frequency to the mid-range all the way to the treble. What I am hearing is a performance which I consider as very fluid and symbiotic, and the cohesion of the dynamic transients in interchange are just simply harmonious. So with regard to that, definitely I have no issues giving this dynamic presentation a 9. And then dynamic again, but now with the extension itself. So when we look at the extension, we are basically talking about how far the reach is for the lower frequency and the upper frequency. EA500 extend very well on both region. So which means that I can hear proper decays which emit or give an impression of good macro and micro details. So definitely for me, that is a 9 as well. Then we'll look at tone and timbre balance. Tone and timbre balance is essentially how does the characteristic of this EA500 in general. I would say that EA500 is something that I would consider as organic sounding, a good traditional dynamic driver sort of sound, which impart proper element of energy balanced with maturity. So definitely from that perspective, I would say that EA5 scores another 9. All right. Now, perhaps related also to the dynamic itself still, which is the note weight and density. I can safely say that EA500 is among the IEM that I consider as rich in the way it presents the sound. It does not feel lean or it doesn't feel dry. The timbre itself, the balance, it's all sounding proper to my ears. Perhaps in a way, I would say that it even sounded a bit warm, especially when using the red nozzle. But that is something which I can totally enjoy. So it is definitely a 9 as well. Okay. Now, let's talk about the individual frequency range. First, we talk about bass performance. Now, let's just make it simple. EA500 is not a bass head IEM. Okay. You can already see from the graph here, and in fact, my own ears telling me this definitely will not satisfy people who love big bass or anybody who prefer Harman type of bass performance. Putting that aside, from my perspective, I totally enjoy this kind of bass performance coming from EA500. And the reason that I'm saying that is because the flow of bass itself, from mid bass to sub bass, of how it interchange between those two sub frequency, the mid bass, despite being commanding and with proper rumble and presence, it does not subdue the sub bass. The sub bass is still there, presenting proper decays, which actually disperse gracefully into the deepest range of the lower frequency capable emitted by the source. And that is definitely something which I love. Even though I am not the sort of person who love bass, I would just give it an 8. Okay. Now, switching to mid-range. Okay. Obviously, from the graph, you can already see that, especially with the red nozzle, the mid-range is kind of a bit pronounced, a bit frontal. And in fact, that reminds me a lot to some of the IEM that I like perhaps Etimotic ER4 series. EA500 present mid-range in a way that I like, okay, especially for listening to jazz, male and female vocal, and it offers like very good balance of transparency and a bit of warmth because of the red nozzle. But it is slightly less warm when using the black nozzle, which is just being transparent. But as I mentioned earlier, I prefer the red nozzle more because it presents the mid-range in a way that it impart a bit sense of emotions, especially listening to somebody like Diana Krall or even Sini Ig. So definitely, from my perspective, EA500 scores very high on mid-range, and I give it a 9. Now, switching to treble performance. So this is depending on which nozzle I am using. And for this grading, I will only refer to the best one which I prefer, which is the red nozzle again. And the reason that I'm saying that is that because the black nozzle exhibit kind of a bit, too much energy for my liking, especially when I subject it to some energetic music. So I actually prefer the red one because it offers a bit of smoothness. Retain the air, the sparkle, and the energy, but it does not exhibit any kind of excessiveness in the way of being sibilant. So definitely from that perspective, the red nozzle is the go-to for me. And in combination with these foam tips here. Yeah, I should have mentioned this earlier, that the entirety of my impression are on this foam tip, my own foam tips. This treble is just lovely on this EA500. it is just bright enough, right, to impart, to retain the organic sense to the whole sound spectrum. So definitely for treble performance, I would give it an 8. Okay. Now, let's move into the technical aspect of this EA500. First, sound stage and spatial projection. Being a single dynamic driver, it is understood that one thing that I noticed that this EA500 does not offer very wide kind of sound stage. But I wish it could have been a bit wider, and the spatial projection itself is more like 2D rather than 3D. So a manner of saying is that it is more suitable for just music, but not suitable for gaming or any kind of 3D kind of binaural sound. So that's pretty much on the soundstage and spatial projection. So I just gonna give it a 7. And then moving on to resolution, imaging, details, and speed. Let's just put it this way. For the price asked, this does not sound like, you know, a 100 US dollar IEM. It sounds more expensive than that. The performance itself, it is very resolving. The way it approach details, the way it handles the nuances of the micro details, the resolution, the imaging, the speed itself, you know, there's no way that I can find any kind of negative element in it. So definitely I would just give it a 9 for this EA500 on that element. And number 10, of course, synergy and versatility. What does it mean by synergy and versatility? I spend a lot of time using my EA500 with my own phone, which is Sony Xperia 1, and also this my favorite dongle of Centron DeckPort HD FC6 recently released, and of course Abigail Pro. What I'm hearing is that a very good synergy of with any type of source I thrown at it. And most importantly is that this thing scales very well with power. Already sounds great with this one BRMS of Abigail Pro, neutral, airy presentation, but it gets richer and more engaging when attached to these two, which totally give it a new perspective of sound indulgence. So definitely I give it a 9 on that versatility. So now let's have a look at the total score for this EA500 then. So if you calculate up from number 1 until 10, EA500 scores a total number of 86 out of 100. And if you look at my grading and the Ordervolt grading, that is definitely a 5-star rated IEM. This is simply amazing. So how does EA500 compares against the rest of the competition? For this purpose, let's just go back to Simgot IEM itself, the one that I have tested so far. I have already reviewed 2 Simgot IEM previously, which is the Simgot Rolshan EM2R and also Simgot EN1000 King Wonder, of which both I really love for the different sort of sound presentation that they presented at their specific price point. Obviously, EN1000 is being the flagship at that point of time. So now that I have this EA500, where does this EA500 falls into the picture? I can just safely say that, you know, I just love the way Simgot tune IEMs. They just seems to know what they are doing, okay? For example, EN1000 compared to EA500 is that it offers a bit more of maturity than EN1000 and a bit less on energy level. So a manner of saying is that it's a bit more for sort of polished presentation and less exciting. But it is also more resolving and more subtle with the micro details as compared to this. Okay, and compared to the other sibling of Simgot, which is the EM2 Rolshan. Okay, I can just put it this way that EM2 Rolshan is a bit more brighter with the upper frequency, and it is also a bit more resolving with macro details. With the lower frequency, Rolshan also seems to be like a bit of focus on the sub-bass region as compared to this. But otherwise, what I'm trying to say is that in general, Simgot really know how to do great IEM, and definitely right. The other two I already rated them 5-star, and this is another 5-star, right, in its own segment. Now moving to the rest of the competition. So first, I would like to bring something which is quite well known to people. within the same price range as well, which is perhaps a Moondrop Aria. Okay, in comparison with Aria, this EA500 is definitely something which I prefer more. Okay, because to me, Aria being Harman style U curve tuning sounds a bit darker to my ears, and it is also less resolving, but it is also less brighter, or should I say, not as bright as this EA500. Okay, so that's pretty much with Aria. Then another popular IEM, which is Headset Sound Hard Mirror. Put it this way, Hard Mirror is definitely the brightest sounding IEM among all of the IEM that I have already mentioned, including this. So Hard Mirror is somebody who love very energetic and very vibrant upper frequency. But a manner of saying is that, as much as I like Hard Mirror, I wasn't able to enjoy it past 1 hour because it's kind of a bit fatiguing, but not this. This one I can listen to for many hours. Then the most recent one that I have reviewed, which is Galileo. And that is pretty much the reason that I'm bringing up Galileo is that because the sort of sound tuning of Galileo and this EA500 is pretty much similar, at least from what my own ears is telling me. All right. So the difference being is that I must admit EA500 does it better in terms of technicalities and also in terms of dynamic transient smoothness. So sorry to say that as much as I like Galileo, but I prefer EA500 more over that. So let's just conclude it. Make it simple. This is, as you have seen just now, a 5-star rated IEM up to 100 US dollar. It is difficult for me, right, to ascertain or to find out any other IEM that offer this sort of quality within that price bracket. And definitely, I hate to admit it, as much as I love Tanjim Zero, which most of you would have known right now, this is definitely a better performer than Tanjim Zero by miles. Okay, so I hope this has been useful to you. Please stay tuned to Andy Order Vote for more contents like this.